before I start, I would just like to acknowledge that I'm joining you from Ngunnawal country, and I would like to pay my respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to traditional owners of other lands and also to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are joining us today. So for those who haven't met me, my name is Alison McMorrow. I am one of the Assistant Secretaries at the Department of Agriculture, Water and the Environment. I have responsibility for the CBD, but also a range of other functions relating to biodiversity policy, including the Indigenous Protected Areas Program, protected areas policy more generally, and a few other functions. So today I'm just going to give a bit of a 101 on the CBD relatively quickly to set the scene for the workshop. And I'd really like to say thank you to Kate and the rest of the ACIUCN people for organising this workshop. I think it's a great opportunity. It's a great opportunity for us in the Australian delegation for the CBD to hear what you think of the current draft of the Global Biodiversity Framework. We are right in the midst of getting ready for the next set of international meetings, which will occur in January. So I'll just run through a few slides to sort of set the scene on the CBD and where Australia's focal areas are. Might get you to flick to the next slide now. Thanks, John.
Yep, done.
Done, great. I'll have to trust you on that one because it's gone blank for me again. So in terms of what is the CBD, CBD is one of the 3 Rio UN conventions, Convention on Biological Diversity. The other 2 are the one on climate change and the one on desertification. It has 3 overarching objectives, which is firstly, the conservation of biological diversity, secondly, the sustainable use of its components, and thirdly, the fair and equitable sharing of the benefits arising from the use of genetic resources. It's underpinned, or it has an overarching rather, probably better way of describing, an overarching vision, 2050 vision of living in harmony with nature, which is that by 2050, biodiversity is valued, conserved, restored and wisely used, maintaining ecosystem services, sustaining a healthy planet and delivering benefits essential for all people. The scope of the CBD is really broad. It's so much broader than just an environmental convention. And what we do in the Australian delegation is consult really broadly with stakeholders, with external stakeholders, but also right across government, because really the CBD has elements that cut across all sectors of the economy. So we really do bring, while the delegation is led out of my portfolio, the environment portfolio, we really bring a whole of government approach to our positions that we take to the meetings. And it also gets into quite technical detail. So it has a very broad scope, but also has a very deep scope in terms of the technical detail that underpins the overarching convention. All right, might flick to the next slide. Thank you. Let me know when it's done.
Yep.
Great, thank you. Sorry, it's a bit clunky. So CBD has 3 bodies, subsidiary bodies. There's one SBI, the subsidiary body on implementation, Substar, the scientific, technical and technological advice body, and then the open-ended working group. And that's where a lot of the detailed work is being done. And these 3 bodies are the focus of the upcoming international meetings that are scheduled for January. So SBI, the first one, it reviews information on progress in terms of implementing the convention. So that includes provision of support for implementation, but also strategic plans that tackle a report on achieving targets under the convention. The second one, Substar, it reports on the technical aspects such as assessments on the status of biological diversity and assessments on the types of measures that are being taken by parties to contribute to the targets. And the third one, the open-ended working group, has been developed to advance preparations for development of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, which is the key focus of the convention at the moment. So flick to the next slide, thank you. Since 2018, negotiations have been underway under the convention to develop that new post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. This framework will set the next tranche of global biodiversity targets to at least 2030. It was supposed to be adopted in October 2020, but progress has been significantly delayed due to the pandemic, and particularly due to the inability for parties to meet face-to-face. An updated draft of the GBF was released on the 13th of July this year, which I think, which I think has been circulated as part of your pack of papers for the workshop. And this is the current draft that we're still negotiating. So it hasn't, there hasn't been a revised draft since that July version. Might flick to the next slide, thank you. So the draft GBF consists of 4 long-term goals for 2050 that are related to that overarching vision of living in harmony with nature. Each goal has a number of corresponding milestones to 2030 to assess progress against those broader 2050 goals. And then the framework has 21 global targets for 2030, all aiming to help achieve that 2050 vision of living in harmony with nature. Worth remembering too that the targets are aimed at the global level. So Australia will have greater capacity to contribute to some targets greater than others. And also worth noting that the draft wording of the targets are not necessarily reflective of the views of the Australian government, because we are one of nearly 200 parties that are negotiating the targets. So the framework itself, the GBF, is supported by a monitoring framework, which consists of a number of indicators, which are grouped into 3 main categories. There are headline indicators that capture the overall scope of the goals and targets. There are component indicators, which are representative of each component of the goals and targets. And then there are complementary indicators, which are used for the thematic and in-depth analysis of the goals and targets. So under the current draft, we have 9 headline indicators for the 4 goals and around 30, or just under 30 headline indicators for the 21 targets. And this monitoring framework, the headline and component and complementary indicators, forms a real significant part of the Substar, one of those subsidiary bodies that I mentioned before. All right, might flick to the next slide, thank you. Great, and I can see it even better. So this slide really sets out the focal areas for Australia's engagement in the GBF negotiations, particularly in the upcoming ones in January. So some of you who might have been to some of our stakeholder consultation on the GBF will have seen these before. They haven't really changed too much, although that last one, the final dot point, is an emerging area of focus for us. So the reason why we identify some areas of focus, we're a pretty small delegation. So compared to some other countries, we'll only have a maximum of 5, probably, even less given the pandemic situation in our delegation. So we've got to target our efforts where we think we can make the most contributions. Doesn't mean to say we don't participate outside of these focal areas, but we try and be a bit forward-leaning, I guess, on these focal areas. So I'll just run through them pretty quickly. Marine and coastal biodiversity. Look, we have nearly 37% of our waters in marine protected areas. We're a member of the High-Level Panel for Sustainable Ocean Economy. We're a member of the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People. And we're a member of the Global Ocean Alliance. So we're a real strong advocate for ensuring the GBF has adequate representation of marine and coastal biodiversity issues, and a really strong advocate of that target to protect 30% of our ocean by 2030. So the second area of focus for us is around that effective protected area management, what's often called 30 by 30. So that's draft target 3 in the GBF, which aims to protect 30% of land and 30% of sea by 2030. And we're really working with our HAC members, that High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People, to work out how to maintain the ambition that's already set out in the draft target, and to ensure that the other components of the target are adequately represented. Our third area of focus is around invasive alien species. And that's really to draw on sort of Australia being a world leader in biosecurity and border measures. And we're well placed to encourage other parties to adopt a strong biosecurity system. but also we are set to benefit if other parties have strong biosecurity measures. Given that we're an island nation, biosecurity is really important for us in terms, not just our own in Australia in the domestic context, but also that other countries have strong biosecurity measures in place. Our fourth area of focus is around sustainable use and waste management through a circular economy. And again, it's to leverage some of the actions that Australia is taking domestically and internationally in the waste space, including through sort of a national plastic plan, national waste policy, and improving coordinated action on marine litter through a new global agreement on marine litter. The next focal area is to ensure equitable participation of Indigenous people and local communities in the design and implementation of the GBF. So this is a bit of a cross-cutting area of focus for us. There is a particular target on Indigenous peoples and local communities, but we're also looking at how can we strengthen some of the other parts of the framework, some of the other targets to ensure that there's adequate and effective participation of Indigenous peoples in the implementation of the GBF. And then, as I mentioned, that final dot point is a new area of focus for us, which is around supporting healthy populations of species and reducing extinction risks. We're just seeing lots more opportunities for Australia to be a bit more forward-leaning in the negotiations in this space compared to sort of how we've played in that space over the last few meetings. So it will be an area that we look to sort of boost what we negotiate on, I guess. All right, might go to the next slide. I think this might be my last slide, which is just to give you a bit of a sense of 2021 progress. That slide, sorry, should say 2021 progress and the path ahead. So in May and June this year, we had about 9 weeks of virtual meetings on Subster and SBI. And then in August and September, we had 2 weeks, again, virtual, on negotiation of that first draft of the post-2020 GBF. When I say negotiation in the virtual meetings, it really wasn't negotiations. I think the virtual settings aren't conducive to real negotiations. So what both those meetings were really parties putting forward proposals. So for the August and September meetings, there were proposals for changes in the wording of the targets and the goals and a bit of a rationale to really set the scene for what's coming up in January, which is when we can get together face-to-face, hopefully, and negotiate on the text. In October this year, we had the high-level opening of COP15. That was a hybrid format, so that we did have some embassy staff who were already in China attend, but there were virtual participation as well. High level, it was leaders and ministers making interventions, and Minister Lee, our Environment Minister, made 2 interventions, which are available on the CBD website. Very happy to send around those links. Her interventions were really focused at showcasing where Australia's focal areas are, but also demonstrating some of the action that Australia is taking to maintain the momentum of the GBF negotiations. So in January, face-to-face negotiations in Geneva, there's about 2.5 weeks set aside for that. And Australia is, at this stage, planning to send a very small delegation. There will be opportunity for virtual viewing of the meetings, but the CBD Secretariat is really trying to limit the amount of virtual participation. So we're really hopeful to get a couple of people over from Australia, and we'll supplement that with a couple of people who are already based in Europe. And then in April and May next year will be part 2 of the COP in China, or in a UN city, depending on the pandemic situation, which is where we expect the adoption of the framework to occur. So I think that's all I had. My next slide is really just a placeholder and a contact email address for my team. I should have mentioned too at the start, I've got a few people from my team who are joining me today, and they'll distribute themselves around the various breakout rooms of the workshops to participate that way. So happy to answer questions now, or I think maybe the questions are later maybe, but that's it. Thank you.